Welcome to our first drill down session, first panel. This one's on AI and the business of publishing. And we've got three very good speakers with us today who are going to give you the overview sense of what's going on here, the broader sense of where AI is beginning to intersect with the book publishing industry. I'm going to let them introduce themselves and ask them to give us a brief intro, give us a sense of your day-to-day work or your day-to-day responsibilities, and then just where are you seeing AI intersecting with those responsibilities? Why don't we start with you, Michael?
Hello, everybody. Great to be with you today. So I suppose I'm coming at this from two angles. Firstly, my day job is that I'm a publisher, and I run a startup publisher called Canelo, based in London. We are originally a digital publisher. We've always tried to be very forward thinking, to do things in a new way, to embrace new technologies, new business models, and so on. And really that occupies a lot of my time. But then also recently I have co-authored a book, a New York Times bestseller indeed, called The Coming Wave, with a major AI entrepreneur, Mustafa Suleiman. And that we've spent years talking about and working on these ideas. I worked with him at DeepMind, now Google DeepMind, one of the world's leading AI companies and a major division of Google. So I've sort of seen how things work in the world of kind of big AI, if you like, and I've also seen how things work in the world of publishing, both corporate publishing and independent publishers like my own. So that's my background. I won't say too much about what I'm doing with AI. I suspect we're doing a bit like everybody else. Just out of interest, one of the uses of AI I found is we are doing a few editions where we're packaging 3 novels in one, and ChatGPT is very helpful at combining the copy into a very small, the copy for 3 books into the space of 1 book. But what I will say is that I genuinely think this is a really important moment. And Marcus is talking about these inflection points and so on. I think potentially this is much more important than the ebook moment. That was the change that didn't really make a difference. Publishers like Penguin Random House were actually very adept at riding that out. They could actually make it work really well. There was this handy ecosystem in Amazon. If anything, it all just made them a bit more profitable and didn't really disrupt the workflow. With AI, what we're looking at is a fundamental property of human beings, intelligence or language, things that are core to our species, things that are core to our societies, things that are core to our culture, to our laws. And of course, as publishers, the very, very thing that is at the heart of our business model and everything we do, we're looking at that property that's just become susceptible to machines that can be automated. And so I think if you don't think that is a kind of earthquake moment, then I really don't know what is. So that's me.
That's great, Michael. Catherine, tell us about yourself.
Yeah, sure. Happy to be here. I'm Catherine, and I am a machine learning and artificial intelligence associate at Penguin Random House. I've been in this role for the past 2 years, and my background is less so in publishing and more from the technological side. So my background is in operations research and machine learning. So to answer the question about how my job intersects with AI, well, that really is my job. That is my focus at Penguin Random House. So I'm mostly in a research and development capacity, and we work on projects with many different areas of the business. I think one thing that I really agree with that Michael said, that it's likely being that this AI revolution will likely have a bigger impact than ebooks have. And I think that's kind of what Marcus touched on in the keynote, was that the creativity aspect is being more impacted, whereas ebooks was more focused on a different format. I think one thing I do want to note about my intersection with AI in publishing is that AI is not necessarily that new to publishing. I'm often asked why an AI role would even exist at a publishing company. But maybe the title has changed a bit, but building statistical models to make decisions has existed for quite a while. And the focus on that has maybe been more on forecasting models and recommendation systems, but these will continue to be a large part of publishing, and they will continue to improve through new AI models.
Thanks very much, Catherine. Over to you, Barbara.
So hi, I'm Barbara Klein-Pope, and I'm Executive Director of Johns Hopkins University Press. And that press is one of the largest U.S. university presses, and I oversee a portfolio of 4 businesses. We have a trade and scholarly book division. We have a journals division. We have Project Muse, which is a massive online aggregation of books and journals, mostly in the humanities and social sciences. And the 4th business is a distribution business where we serve other university presses, distributing both books, printed books and ebooks. And so all 4 of those businesses within our portfolio are being impacted by AI and will be impacted by AI. In Project Muse, for example, as Catherine talked about, we're already using AI in the back end of that, in search, in ways in which to have a recommendation engine on that platform and those kinds of things. But another reason why it's affecting our entire business, because I personally have not been excited about anything in publishing this much since the internet came along. And I've been in publishing for 40 years, so there's a lot of things to be excited about over those 40 years. And ebooks was a pretty cool thing, but the internet and now AI, I think, comes to the top. Back in the early 90s, I was working at the National Academies, and we were putting our books up in page image format. So I've been at this for a really long time, and I think generative AI is made for our content-rich business, and it's a truly amazing time to be in publishing.
That's great, Barbara. Thanks very much. It's interesting, all of your perspectives. I want to go back up to the sort of 1,000-foot level, if we could, for a minute, and think about the differentiation. We're going to have some subsequent sessions to look at editorial, to look at production, to look at marketing. All of you have management roles. How does the manager's responsibility around implementing AI differ from those people working in the trenches? Barbara?
So, as a leader, we're a pretty large university press. As I said, we have about 130 staff members across the press. And as a leader, it's really my job to empower our staff to give their mundane tasks to AI and to then allow their jobs to be more creative. And so it's also my job to be sure that the staff understands and feels confident that AI can give them a leg up and make their job more fulfilling, but not replace them. And I think that most of our staff members are embracing AI, and I see it on a daily basis. Not that we're far along, as Peter said, and I was happy to hear that we're still in the toddler stage of AI. But I think that the authentic message to staff is really that generative AI will make us more and more productive over the entire landscape of publishing, but that we're going to still need the human creative touch. And just a real quick anecdote, I'm actively encouraging staff to experiment with AI across the press and across our businesses and across our operations. And what I learned recently at one of our kind of freewheeling Let's Chat sessions that we have once a month with staff was that they were excited about AI, but worried about not having guardrails or guidelines. that surprised me a little bit. I was sort of letting the reins loose and letting people run with this, but they really wanted those guidelines. And so after that meeting, I marched right back to my office and wrote up some guidelines. And I thought it would be difficult to do because we're so early in this. So I asked ChatGPT to write some guidelines. And that was relatively easy to go through and make sure that our staff felt safe experimenting with AI, that they weren't going to get in trouble for something they were doing within AI. And we also made sure that people understood that these are guidelines for today and they could change and will change tomorrow and next week and next month and next year.
Great, thanks. Michael, how do you see it?
I think it's extraordinary to hear Barbara say that she's encouraging experimentation, because that's the first time I've heard any senior executive in publishing say anything like that. So I think that's an amazing message. Generally, my experience of where the whole industry is, authors, agents, publishers, is just that there's a lot of kind of fear and loathing of AI, and that everyone is just taking an immediately negative view. So, I actually think the role of management here is, the first thing I would say is to encourage experimentation, to say, look, these tools are here, they're out there. They can probably make your job easier if you just start to use them. So I would completely echo and support that. But then I think the other thing that management's going to need to do is it's going to be about judgment. What are the appropriate uses? And again, I think that ties into what Barbara said. Is it okay to use an AI generated image on a cover? In what context might that be okay? Ultimately, that's a management decision. And it is going to be about judgment. And then lastly, I think it's going to be about steering the long-term strategy. What does it mean to publish books if any book could be generated at the push of a button? What does it mean to be a publisher if a sort of specific flavor of ChatGPT becomes an author brand up there with George R.R. Martin? Actually working out the core nature of the business and how to protect that, whilst also embracing all the opportunities. It's a fiendish puzzle. And I think that's ultimately going to have to be the job of publishing management. And, at times, I think that job of reimagining the business model, that hasn't really been there in our industry. But this time, there's no shirking it.
Yeah, excellent point. Catherine, when I think about your role at Penguin Random House, I'm thinking you're kind of a lightning rod. People would be bringing their attitude to you, whether it's positive, whether it's full of questions, whether it's negative, because there's certainly lots of negativity in the industry. How do you navigate your interactions with the staff in that very large company?
So a way that I've seen my role change since all these new generative AI models have come out is, I think there's been a lot more focus on education and communication. And then lastly, collaboration with other groups. We've definitely received requests from people of various areas of the company that are interested in either learning more about AI. They have, policy questions, which isn't my wheelhouse. I would probably direct them somewhere else. But and also just they might have a project and they're saying, hey, do you think this is something that we could do? Sometimes it's something that is solvable with AI. Sometimes it's really just like logic-based automation of sorts. But, it's not that I'm not expecting maybe some of the strain people are feeling based on AI to come towards me. But overall, I think I've mostly been met with curiosity and questions. And so I think from that, kind of to echo what Barbara and Michael have been saying, but there's been a need for writing formal guidelines, kind of educating people on how to protect data and not just, send it all out to ChatGPT. So it's been really interesting to be a bit more connected to other areas. of the company and see all of this play out.
Great, thanks. Barbara, the guardrails, I'm intrigued by those. Can you give us a few glimpses of what those guardrails are like, of how you express to staff? Ways?
So, in the end, a leader always likes it when you hear something new and you're surprised, and then you listen to it and go do something about it. Because as I was writing those guidelines, it was clear that we needed them, right? And so our CIO, Kevin Loftus, is our point person for everything AI and is the keeper of all the use cases and all of those kinds of things. And he figured out a way for us to use generative AI in a way that we're not exposing our manuscripts, to the internet, right? So we have to do that, and I think all publishing companies are thinking about ways in which to do that, because you can't just take the content and let it out. And that's what people were worried about, that our content would get out into the world and they would get in trouble for that. So some of the parts of those guidelines include the specific technology that we're using, and if something in those guidelines isn't covered, the person to go to ask if is it okay for us to train this summary of our book on this technology to get a description or to get metadata or to try to get alt text. We've not been super successful with getting alt text at this point, but summaries of descriptions and those kinds of things. In addition, those conversations spurred our marketing department to really take a marketing department across our divisions to really take this on and to hold workshops and try to educate staff on the ways in which we can use generative AI and how much human touch is still necessary and will probably, I don't know how much will still be necessary in a certain period of time, but the human creativity, the human checking is still very much needed at this point. So those guidelines are I think very useful, and was happy to have a conversation with, I think there are about 40, 50 people in the room when we were talking about that.
That's great. Let's move in a little bit of a different direction and think about the downsides. We're all very excited where this stuff's going, but we all see risks and real potential problems as well. And I wonder, Catherine, if we could start by talking about what are the downsides? What keeps you awake at night on the negative side of the street of worrying about where this stuff's going within the publishing industry?
Yeah, sure. A concern that I definitely have is, with using these large language models, you're typically given results that sound very confident and realistic. And I think there's an impulse to take those answers as expert opinion and then put them into your own work. But there's a lot of problems, which I'm sure many of you have seen, with accuracy. So it's important that, all work is proofread and edited and checked for accuracy. And then I think it's also important to keep in mind that with future models, I think we're going to see large improvements on, them being able to reason, directly answer questions, the question that you had in mind when you're asking, read between the lines. But it's still a language model at the end of the day. It's not attached to some database with factual information. It's modeling all the language we have on the internet. So there will likely still be a lot of factual inaccuracies. So that's something that concerns me, is just more the spread of more incorrect information everywhere.
Yep. Michael, what are the risks? What are the downsides?
Well, I think there are going to be a few. It just interestingly, pretty much since this conference has started, OpenAI has announced just now that it's integrating live web search into its products, and so this idea of verification has just sort of moved forward again. But it's obviously a huge problem. There are these massive societal problems that are coming down the track because of AI. And that's what in this book, The Coming Wave, we're talking about, just these macro problems that at the very highest level could imperil the nation state. In kind of very far off scenarios will be this existential risk and so on. So the downsides are pretty massive. For publishing, I think the major problem, or the most immediate problem that I can see, is one that everyone has acknowledged. This is happening. It's coming. We're not going to be able to keep these kind of large language models, or indeed any kind of AI system, in a box indefinitely. A lot of the content is already out there. The models exist. They've been trained on vast amounts of text, including many books. And The Atlantic just the other day has uncovered this database of books. So I think everyone knows these models are coming. Everyone knows there's going to have to be some kind of settlement on licensing or copyright. But truthfully, nobody, not the people at the copyright agencies, not people at publishers, not people at tech companies, nobody has worked out a way to square the circle of the fact that you have billions upon billions, trillions of tokens in a large language model. And, exactly what a single book has contributed to that model is infinitesimal, absolutely tiny. The value that it is contributing to a model is absolutely tiny, yet it is nonetheless there and may be replicated. So how do we create a kind of licensing regime or a way of monetizing content in large language models that is going to satisfy anyone, even remotely? Well, this is a challenge to the intellectual property world, I think, basically without precedent. And I've spoken to people recently on the copyright side and on the tech side, and everyone just says, yeah, we know that there's going to be something that has to happen, but we have no idea how to make this work. So, that's the obvious downside to me. Nobody has a clue how to make a business model that will even remotely satisfy anyone.
Yes. Barbara?
I agree with both of those. So the one I'm going to choose to talk about is has to do with equity. And large language models really have the ability to magnify the structural racism and other biases that are already in our society. And that's a major concern. We know that just basic algorithms have bias in them. So think about large language models and what happens when the bias gets rinsed and repeated billions and billions of times. Does that bias get worse and worse and worse against marginalized communities? So for me, that's one of the major concerns and one of the major downsides. And I've read places that say that they're trying to correct for that. They don't say how they're correcting for that. Maybe Catherine knows better, but she's on the more technical side, but I don't know how you correct for that.
Good. The concerns that have arisen that you described so well there, Michael, have got authors up in arms, understandably, and without any answers, people are getting even more up in arms. And we've talked the other day, Barbara, tell me about how you're interacting with your authors and some of their concerns. And what does it mean? How does a publisher manage its relationships with authors in these turbulent times?
We've gotten a few requests to include in contracts, and I don't think we can talk about specific contract terms, but to include some language that would make sure that authors get consent if we decide to license to a large language model. In addition, a couple of other directors of university presses and their legal counsel just have been sharing information, not specific terms, not any of that kind of thing. But I think at this point, we need to share across the industry the kinds of things that we're hearing and make sure that we both protect the intellectual property of our authors and at the same time make sure that we're doing what is reasonable to make sure that their work makes impact in the world. And in a mission-driven organization, we have to balance, of course, the financial aspects of publishing with making impact. And I'm sure authors across all publishing want to have an impact on their readers. So anyway, that's sort of what we're working on.
That makes a lot of sense. A reminder, we're going to have a session later today looking at the legal aspects and trying to drill down on what the current concerns are. So we'll provide some additional detail within the program. I see some questions coming in where people are wondering what specific tasks within publishing are best suited to the current AI tools. Which ones, where are you focusing your energy? Michael, within your publishing company?
I mean, honestly, I think right now it's just improve this bit of copy, things like that. It isn't there. What I guess the message that I would like to put out is probably the real impact of AI is not going to be about fine-tuning existing processes. I mean, I think it will do that, but that's not the real impact. The real impact is when we have systems that can generate novel or book length texts on the fly. So you could put in your parameters. You say, I want to read a crime novel set in Paris, starring Elvis Presley. Bam, it does that for you. Oh, and by the way, my favorite restaurant is there and it's got to have that restaurant in. I think the impact is going to come when translation is almost automatic. I think the impact is really going to come when you can just turn any film into a graphic novel pretty much automatically, or you can just write the novel of a film, or you can make the film from a novel. And, you know, all media is essentially one kind of seamless, interchangeable whole, and it can do that automatically. It's this kind of thing, this kind of fundamental change to the product set and the business model. That's what I think is both exciting and scary. So, you know, yes, it's going to have an impact on how we test marketing. You know, how do we test ads? How do we generate ads? But the big change comes when the core product starts to evolve in a way that it never has before.
Catherine, how do you balance that kind of vision with your day-to-day responsibilities of making this stuff work now?
Yeah, I can only speculate on what the further future would be that Michael is talking about. I think it'll also kind of be down to copyright law, whether you're able to actually copyright these outputs. In terms of my day-to-day, it's really a ton of different applications. There is the optimization aspect of just forecasting demand correctly, and that's something that's still very important. Then there's the discovery problem of, you know, with all of these new AI generated books, because it already is, you know, happening with startups. People are AI generating books. And Amazon recently had to put a limit on how many self-published books authors could upload to 3, which seems like an insane amount still. So I think we're definitely going to see what Michael's talking about in trade publishing. I think it's really adding efficiency to our processes and then enhancing them through, you know, maybe making materials that go along with the book to make them more interactive, book club guides, and adding accessibility components so they can reach a wider audience.
Barbara, where are you focused at Johns Hopkins?
Right now, as I mentioned a couple minutes ago, marketing has really taken this on. Looking at you know, creating metadata, creating social media posts, using it throughout all of marketing at this point. We're just experimenting with it. I would imagine there's some social media posts that have been created by ChatGPT at this point, because it's not hard to do. But mostly on the marketing side is where we're seeing it. But on the other hand, you'll hear from Ziam Bloom later in the production side, where she's, you know, has big plans for AI in production.
That's great. We have to wrap up. Michael, when we spoke the other day, you talked very eloquently about language as a sort of fundamental aspect of this transition. Can you share a few thoughts there?
Yeah, well, I think it just goes back really to what I was trying to suggest at the very beginning. You know, language is core to human identity. You know, we evolved in parallel with the capacity to speak language. You know, all of our laws exist in written form. Our culture is written. Words are, I think, so fundamental to what it means to be a human being. I mean, that's true biologically, culturally, socially. All of our relationships happen a lot, most of it through language. And I just think, you know, as publishers, we've always been incredibly close to words. We're people who care about words. We're businesses who care about words. And so it is just really significant and important that the human relationship with words has changed forever in a sort of a once in a lifetime way. And I think we should be excited by that. We should be scared by that. And, you know, it's good that we're having conversations like this now, because we're going to have to get really, really into the weeds of rebuilding our businesses, our cultures, our sense of who we are, even as a species.
Fantastic. Thank you, Michael. And thank you, Catherine. Thank you, Barbara, for joining us today. Let's keep the conversation going.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.